Welcome to the Hindu Daily. All right, let's dive right in. We're starting today with a massive strategic reset involving an 80-year-old alliance.
The U.S.-Saudi relationship.
Exactly. This partnership is, well, it's arguably one of the oldest transactional deals still going. It predates the UN, NATO, you name it.
It started way back in 1945 on the USS Quincy, a secret oil for security deal.
Right. And it was renewed in 2005. But what's happening now, this reset, feels different. What's changed?
Well, what's fascinating is how this new summit, especially with the signals of let's call it a Trump 2.0 approach, it's moving way beyond that old oil for security model.
So it's not just we protect you, you give us oil anymore.
Not at all. The conversation has broadened into high technology, strategic military commitments. It's a whole new ballgame.
And the money involved is just staggering. That seems to define the new shape of this deal.
Absolutely. I mean, you're looking at $270 billion in new deals signed in investment forums.
And that's on top of the military equipment agreement.
Right, $142 billion for military hardware. But the really critical piece is the commitment from the Saudi side to the U.S. economy itself.
You're talking about the investment pledge from MBS.
Yes. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has agreed to raise Saudi investments in the U.S. from $600 billion to $1 trillion.
$1 trillion. When you think about their own domestic needs, Vision 2030, NEOM, all these massive projects, why commit $400 billion more to the U.S.? Is this a financial hedge, or is it more like a political insurance policy?
It's both, but I think it leans heavily towards political insurance. That $1 trillion figure is nearly equal to the entire corpus of their public investment fund, the PIF.
So almost their entire country's GDP.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And 40% of their foreign investments are already in the U.S.
Yeah.
So by locking in such a massive stake, MBS is basically buying political confidence and security for decades, no matter who's in the White House.
And the strategic side goes beyond just money and weapons.
Correct. They signed a strategic defense agreement. This designates Saudi Arabia as a major non-NATO ally. That's a huge deal.
It explicitly commits the U.S. to help if Saudi Arabia is attacked.
It raises the stakes for any regional aggressor, absolutely.
Yeah.
And on top of that, there's progress on civil nuclear energy and, maybe most importantly, the supply of state-of-the-art AI chips.
That AI chip commitment feels incredibly forward-looking. It suggests their long-term security isn't just in oil, it's in technological dominance.
Exactly. They need those cutting-edge chips that only the U.S. controls to power their Vision 2030 ambitions. This gives Washington leverage, of course, but it also cements the relationship right in the middle of the most critical geopolitical area of our time: data and AI.
And this is all happening despite some pretty serious strings in the past. People forget the 1973 oil embargo, or when they bought missiles from China in the 80s.
And more recently, the constraints on military supplies during the Yemen War and, of course, the Khashoggi assassination in 2018, which really pushed Riyadh to diversify its relationships with China and Russia.
So this reset is Washington trying to pull Riyadh back into its orbit.
It is. And now you see MBS, who's still young, taking on a much more assertive regional role. He's facilitating talks between Iran and Washington. He got the U.S. to drop sanctions against Syria. He's positioning himself as a key player.
So what does this all mean for you, our listener, especially thinking about India?
Okay, a few key things. First, security. This new defense deal could mean advanced U.S. military tech finds its way to Pakistan via Riyadh. That's something to watch.
And on the economic side?
Well, for India, a major oil importer, stable prices are always better than volatile ones. This U.S.-Saudi coordination helps moderate the market.
And finally, those big corridor projects like IMEC.
Precisely. The emerging Saudi-Israel normalization could be a huge facilitator for the India-Middle East-Europe economic corridor. Plus, all those Vision 2030 projects like AI data centers create massive opportunities for Indian tech and talent.
Okay, from that grand global strategy, let's pivot to something much closer to home. The systemic failures in our own workplace safety laws.
Yes. Specifically, the Protection of Women from Sexual Harassment Act, or the POSH Act.
We saw a recent case in Chandigarh. A professor was sacked after an ICC probe. And while that's a rare victory, it actually exposes some really deep flaws in the 2013 law.
It really does, especially when you look at the unequal power dynamics you find in places like academia.
So let's unpack that. The core issue seems to be around the idea of consent itself.
That's the crux of it. The Act talks about consent, but it completely fails to distinguish it from informed consent. Consent just isn't meaningful when it's obtained through manipulation or an imbalance of power.
Which is so common in a professor-student or a senior-junior colleague relationship.
Exactly. Perpetrators, often highly educated, know how to exploit that trust. They operate in this gray zone of legality, using psychological manipulation or making deceitful promises that don't leave any obvious evidence.
And the law doesn't really have a way to handle that kind of emotional harassment.
It struggles. It's focused on explicit, visible acts. This creates a legal blind spot. And on top of that conceptual flaw, you have procedural hurdles that just re-traumatize victims.
You're talking about the 3-month time limit for filing a complaint.
Yes, it's a pressing flaw. It's essentially an expiry date on justice. Recognizing what happened, processing the trauma, and finding the courage to speak up, that often takes way longer than 3 months.
And even the language the law uses seems to downplay the severity. It calls the accused a respondent.
A small word with a huge impact. It dilutes the offense, makes it sound like a simple HR issue rather than what it often is, a crime that causes deep psychological trauma.
What about the committees themselves, the ICCs? Are they equipped to handle this?
Often, no. The vague definitions in the Act put a huge burden of proof on the woman, and the committees often look for a single piece of direct evidence, when harassment is usually a pattern of behavior. They don't always recognize the weight of circumstantial evidence.
And there's a massive loophole when a perpetrator moves between institutions?
A huge one. The Act is silent on interinstitutional complaints. A visiting professor can be a repeat offender, and there's no system to connect the dots between campuses. And finally, there's the digital reality.
Vanishing messages, encrypted chats.
Right. ICC members usually don't have the technical training to interpret this kind of evidence. The law needs to be strengthened with longer timelines, clearer language, and a real recognition of both emotional and digital abuse.
From the challenges of real-world safety, let's shift to the digital world, where personal identity itself is under threat.
Yes, from AI-generated content and deepfakes. This isn't hypothetical anymore. We just saw a lawsuit filed by Abhishek and Aishwarya Bachchan against Google and YouTube over this kind of fictitious content.
And this is a direct challenge to what we call personality rights, right? Can you define that for us?
Personality rights basically protect your identity, your name, image, likeness, your voice. AI has made all of these incredibly vulnerable.
It risks turning a person's identity into a cheap commodity.
Exactly. And globally, the legal approach to protecting these rights is, well, it's fragmented.
How so?
Europe uses a dignity-based model under GDPR where identity is a fundamental right. The U.S. has a property-based model, the right of publicity, where identity is an asset you can sell. Tennessee's LVAS Act, banning unauthorized AI use of voices, is a perfect example.
And India is somewhere in the middle, a hybrid approach.
It is, but our framework is very reactive. The rights aren't codified in a single law. They derive from Article 21, the right to life and liberty.
So we rely on the courts to set the boundaries.
We do. And they have. We saw it in 2022 with Amitabh Bachchan, then in 2023 with Anil Kapoor's Jackass catchphrase, and just this year with singer Arijit Singh's voice being protected from AI replication.
But those precedents are one thing. Enforcement must be incredibly difficult.
It's the core challenge. The people creating deepfakes are anonymous, often operating across borders. Our current national laws just can't keep up with the transnational nature of AI.
This brings up a huge ethical question, especially for deceased artists. You mentioned Indian courts say personality rights aren't heritable.
Yes, they cease upon death. This opens a Pandora's box for AI recreations of deceased artists. Who controls their likeness? Who profits? Our legal framework is just not ready for the wave of AI ghost content that's coming.
So we need to move from being reactive to proactive.
Absolutely. We need comprehensive legislation. We need things like mandatory AI watermarking to tell what's real and what's fake, clear platform liability, and crucially, international collaboration. AI doesn't respect borders, so our laws can't either.
That focus on international collaboration brings us neatly to China. And I have to say, the data on their global lending was surprising.
It's a real eye-opener, isn't it? The standard narrative is all about the Belt and Road Initiative in developing countries.
Right. So I saw this data from aid data, over $2 trillion lent globally. And the biggest recipient was the United States. How does that work?
It highlights a major strategic pivot by Beijing. Yes, the U.S. received $200 billion. That's more than Russia or Australia. It shows China is moving away from aid for poorer nations and towards commercial lending in developed countries.
So why the shift? Why lend to your biggest economic rival?
A couple of reasons. First, the Belt and Road Initiative has shrunk from about 75% of their lending to just 25%. Many of those projects had low returns and high risks.
So they're looking for more secure, higher yield returns.
Exactly. And they're targeting access to technology and strategic assets in developed economies. Over 75% of the loans to U.S. companies were purely commercial investments.
The report also mentioned an 80% success rate for China's overseas mergers and acquisitions. How are they achieving that?
The report suggests it's partly by exploiting weaker foreign capital screening in other countries. They allegedly use complex structures, like offshore shell companies, that make the source of the money opaque and harder for regulators to track.
And where does India fit into this picture?
India received about $11.1 billion. It's a mix of commercial and developmental funds, mostly for the energy and financial sectors. It's a modest amount compared to others, but it still shows how interconnected global finance is.
It's a powerful reminder that money follows strategic opportunity. Speaking of strategy, let's turn to Assam, where climate change is threatening one of India's most iconic industries.
The tea industry. The whole climate cycle there is blurring. The calm, cool winters are gone, replaced by persistent heat and humidity. For the 1.2 million workers in that $10 billion economy, this is an existential threat.
Tea plants are notoriously sensitive. They need a very narrow temperature range, consistent rain. What are the specific stressors they're facing now?
It's a multi-pronged attack. You have long, dry spells followed by sudden, heavy downpours that cause erosion. Nighttime temperatures are rising, so the plants don't get a chance to rest. This stresses them, stunts their growth, and makes them vulnerable to new kinds of pests.
And the historical data backs this up.
It does. The Tea Research Association found that the average minimum temperature has gone up by 1 degree Celsius in the last 90 years, and the region has lost 200 millimeters of annual rainfall.
And this is all happening while the price of tea has barely budged. That's the cool paradox here.
That's right. Over the last 30 years, tea auction prices have only grown by about 4.8% annually. Compare that to wheat or rice, which saw 10% growth. So growers are getting hit by climate change and stagnant prices at the same time.
They can't afford to invest in the very resilience they need to survive.
Precisely. And a recent study modeled what this means for the future. By 2050, the areas that are currently considered very good for tea, like Upper Assam, could lose their advantage.
And the unique flavor, that famous malty taste of Assam tea, is at risk.
It is. The heat and erratic rain disrupt the chemistry of the leaves. If that flavor profile changes, the entire industry faces an identity crisis. Cultivation might have to shift to higher altitudes like Karbi Anglong just to survive.
So what are the solutions? What adaptive strategies are being discussed?
Researchers are pushing for climate-resilient practices. Things like using seed-grown varieties with deep roots that can withstand drought. Also, soil conservation methods like mulching and agroforestry to keep moisture in the ground and moderate the heat.
Is any of this being done at scale?
There are programs like Trustia, which is a multi-stakeholder initiative promoting a sustainable tea code. They're working with thousands of growers to build resilience.
And you can't ignore the politics of this.
Absolutely not. The tea tribes are a huge political constituency in Assam. With state elections coming up in early 2026, you can be sure their concerns over rising costs and stagnant wages will be a major issue.
From the soil of Assam to the laws that govern it, let's talk about seed sovereignty and a new draft bill aiming to overhaul the system.
Right, the Draft Seeds Bill. It's meant to modernize the old 1966 Act with the stated goals of promoting ease of doing business and ensuring quality seeds for farmers.
Okay, so what are the key new provisions here? What changes?
Well, the most crucial part is what it doesn't do. The bill does not restrict a farmer's right to grow, save, use, or exchange their own seeds.
That's a fundamental right for farmers.
It is. The only restriction is that they can't sell those seeds under a brand name. This right is explicitly linked to the existing PPV&FR Act.
The Protection of Plant Varieties and Farmers' Rights Act. What does that do, in simple terms?
That 2001 Act is what legally recognizes and protects traditional farmer seed varieties. It's unique because it enshrines the farmer's right to save and reuse seeds, which often clashes with the IP rights of big seed companies. The new bill tries to keep that protection while centralizing the regulation.
How is it centralizing things?
It makes registration of all seed processing units mandatory. It sets up central and state seed committees to define quality standards, things like germination rates and purity. And there's a central accreditation system for companies that operate in multiple states.
And with more regulation comes stricter enforcement.
Much stricter. The penalties are higher than in the 2019 draft fines, up to 30 lakh rupees and even imprisonment. Seed inspectors also get new search and seize powers.
The industry seems to welcome this, but farmer bodies like the All India Kisan Sabha are skeptical. Why?
They're worried about two main things. First, costs. They fear this framework will allow corporations to engage in predatory pricing, making farmers dependent on expensive, branded seeds.
And the second concern is about sovereignty itself.
Yes, they see this centralized, corporatized system as a political project that could dispossess small farmers and hand over the country's seed sovereignty to a few monopolies, both domestic and multinational.
So what's their core demand?
That this new framework has to complement, not conflict with, the existing laws that protect farmers, especially the PPVNFR Act. They argue that ease of doing business shouldn't come at the cost of biodiversity and farmer rights.
That tension is central. Now let's move from agricultural policy to a constitutional struggle over the independence of the police force.
We're looking at Tamil Nadu, where there's a major controversy over the appointment of the state's police chief. The state failed to appoint a regular DGP and instead appointed an in-charge officer who was sixth in seniority.
And this isn't just a local issue. It's a classic example of the conflict between political control and the mandated independence of the police. What does the Supreme Court say about this?
The guidelines are crystal clear from the 2006 Prakash Singh case. The state has to select the DGP from a panel of the three most senior officers, a panel that must be approved by the UPSC.
And the selected officer gets a fixed 2-year tenure, right, to insulate them from political pressure.
Exactly. But Tamil Nadu didn't just violate the choice, they violated the timeline. They were supposed to send their proposal to the UPSC 3 months before the vacancy. They sent it 1 day before.
That seems intentional. It basically guaranteed the proper procedure couldn't be followed.
It seems that way. And it led to this legal mess. The state government rejected the panel the UPSC eventually sent. The chief secretary is now facing contempt petitions.
What happened in that UPSC meeting?
Details emerged that the state government actively tried to undermine the process. They withdrew the integrity certificate for one officer and said they were unwilling to impanel 3 others, basically trying to push their own preferred candidates who didn't meet the seniority criteria.
So where does it stand now?
The state is facing a willful contempt case in the Supreme Court for failing to make a regular appointment. The court is treating it as a serious constitutional violation.
It's a critical test of judicial oversight. This focus on institutional standards brings us to our next topic: the crisis of research fraud in India's higher education institutions.
It's a real epidemic. We're seeing publications and retractions both growing rapidly. And the root cause isn't just publish or perish, it's a deep institutional bias.
A bias towards what, exactly?
The bias towards publishing over teaching. The UGC and the universities themselves tie career advancement, promotions, everything to publication metrics. There are almost no real incentives for improving your teaching quality.
And what's driving the institutions to push this so hard?
2 things, really. First, university rankings. National and global rankings are heavily based on publication volume. So institutions, especially private ones competing for students, push their faculty to publish to climb the ranks.
And the second driver is an assumption about the link between research and teaching.
Right, the belief that good researchers are automatically good teachers.
Right.
But the academic literature on this is mixed at best. The evidence suggests that a good teacher is a good teacher because of pedagogical training and context, not just because they have papers in a journal.
And this bias was formalized into policy.
Yes, with the UGC's 2010 Academic Performance Indicator, or API, it cemented publication scores as the key to career advancement.
But the reality is that most institutions in India simply don't have the infrastructure for high-level research.
And that's the core of the problem. You're expecting faculty in all kinds of institutions, even undergraduate colleges, to publish without adequate libraries, labs, funding, or even the time to do it. It's an impossible expectation.
So when you combine intense pressure with severe limitations, you get
the fraud loop. Publish or perish becomes literal. Faculty and students start churning out fraudulent papers just to meet the metrics for rankings and promotions. Predatory journals benefit, and the whole system is corrupted.
And it's completely misaligned with what students actually need.
Absolutely. 80% of our students are undergraduates. They need better teachers. Forcing teaching-focused faculty to prioritize research in these conditions is counterproductive. It serves the rankings, not India's knowledge sector.
It's a troubling cycle. Let's conclude today by looking at another system trying to solve a long-standing problem: The UK's two-decade productivity puzzle.
Yes, Britain's productivity has been stalled for years, and now they're pinning their hopes on the rapid adoption of artificial intelligence. And because the UK economy is 80% services, it might just be uniquely positioned for AI to make a real impact.
Why is the services sector so ripe for AI disruption?
Because AI is brilliant at processing information and automating cognitive tasks, which is the bread and butter of services. We're already seeing incredible case studies. A mid-tier accounting firm, Moore Kingston Smith, saw profit margins jump after they started using AI.
What did they use it for?
Their corporate fraud team used a Google Gemini platform to create complex reports. A job that used to take them 2 weeks now takes them 2 hours.
2 weeks to 2 hours? That's a massive gain.
It is. And the team that used AI most intensively reported a profit margin that was 8 percentage points higher. The cost, they said, was pennies in the pound compared to other tech.
The governor of the Bank of England pointed out that it took 40 years for electricity's impact to show up in productivity stats. Are we expecting AI to be faster?
The consensus is yes. While the full impact will take decades, experts are predicting a boost of 0.1 to 0.2 percentage points to annual growth pretty soon. The UK's lighter touch regulation might also speed up adoption compared to Europe.
But it's not all positive, is it? There are risks.
Definitely. The benefits might not be felt evenly. Struggling factories, for example, are more focused on robotics than generative AI. And there's a risk the gains will mostly go to large firms, increasing inequality and reducing competition.
And what about the regulators? Are they keeping up?
That's a big fear, especially in highly regulated sectors like accounting. Firms are worried they don't have clear rules on what is and isn't allowed when using AI for things like auditing, and that legal gray zone slows things down.
And finally, the question on everyone's mind. What about jobs?
This is the central anxiety. A recent survey showed 17% of private sector employers expect to cut headcount in the next year because of AI. The accounting firm we mentioned, MKS, cut its graduate hires as a short shock to force staff to adapt. So while new jobs may emerge, the initial labor displacement is a very real risk.
Thank you for listening. If you want to provide suggestions, please contact on the Twitter handle given in the episode description. As always, we are eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.